All right, what's up, everybody? We have 10-ish, as usual, minutes here with Mr. Paul Neese. Hasn't been on in a while, actually.
It's been a little bit, yeah.
We're tossing him into his first 10-minute talk here. So anyway, we have on hand the subject of angle compensation when it comes to range finding. And I know that this is one thing a lot of people ask if a rangefinder has that feature in it. Luckily, all of our rangefinders, binoculars and monocular style, have it in them.
They do.
So, Paul, maybe you can explain, because you've used rangefinders for quite some time, and you were on that podcast we did way back when, all about rangefinders. You can go back and listen to it. But just what is angle compensation, and when would one want to use it, and why?
Well, the trick, the goal is to understand a little bit why you need it. And it comes up in, typically for a hunter anyway, which is my background, in hunting and shooting in mountainous terrain where you're going at steep angles. And to boil it down quickly, what happens is when you're calculating bullet drop for distance shooting, the key factor is the horizontal part of that bullet's travel. Obviously, if you're shooting at an angle, you have both vertical and horizontal components to that flight. Mm-hmm. But what you have to remember is when you're calculating bullet drop, gravity pulls the bullet down. That's why you're having to do that calculation to begin with. And when the bullet is traveling horizontally, the gravity is pulling straight down against it, so it sort of has a maximum effect. Conversely, if you were to imagine a bullet being shot straight up in the air, gravity is either going to slow down that bullet or speed it up on the way back down, but it's not going to divert its flight left or right.
Okay. Right.
So you have to, when you're breaking down an angled shot, the part that really matters is sort of the horizontal component of that shot. And in a nutshell, that's kind of what angle compensation is. It's an algorithm in the rangefinders which is designed to break down that distance and sort of separate out what the horizontal component of the distance is. Mm-hmm. And that's essentially done by taking the line of sight distance and multiplying it by the cosine of the angle that it's formed if that were the hypotenuse of a right angle triangle.
Yeah.
So it's fairly simple math.
Yeah. You go back to your old geometry class when you had right angle triangles.
Exactly.
And like you said, the hypotenuse would basically be the point, or the hypotenuse of the triangle being the longest side of the triangle, and the part of the triangle that's going at an angle other than 90 degrees. That is essentially what would be the line of sight line, like you're discussing. So that's between the hunter and the wild game they're hunting. But yeah, then that horizontal distance between you, if you almost put a point above said deer or whatever you're hunting, if you put a point above it in space, that would be even with your eye line, or the line of your weapon, and then you drew a straight line between you and that point in space. That's what it's actually giving you, because that's the only point really where gravity is affecting it, which is what then you'll want to know for not just for bullets, but also arrows too. Right?
Any projectile.
Any projectile. Yeah. So then you know how much drop you need to account for.
Right.
Because if you use that hypotenuse, it's going to tell you, as we know, that's the longest side of that triangle in that case. So it's going to tell you that it's further away than you really need to account for in terms of drop.
Right. Yeah, it's the actual distance between you and that point.
Yeah, as the crow flies, if you will.
As the crow flies. Right. But, you look at, I'm picturing like maybe a wildly exaggerated right angle triangle where the vertical is like extremely long, right? Mm-hmm. But the horizontal base is like maybe not that long.
Yeah.
So it's just that horizontal distance that you really need to account for in this type of scenario.
It is. Yeah. And there's an interesting aside to this too. In most of our rangefinders, we also give guys the option to choose a line of sight option, which gives, we were talking about the hypotenuse of that triangle. Well, that gives you that hypotenuse. Mm-hmm. And the reason that can be important too on this same topic is if you have a shot such as Mark described, which is steep angle, long ways, long distance, well, you have to remember the bullet travels the distance of that hypotenuse. Mm-hmm. Even though you're calculating the effect of gravity on that short distance, the bullet is actually traveling that full long distance. Mm-hmm. And so in some instances where you have a steep angle and a long shot, The best way to go about calculating bullet drop is to use line of sight, but then something like a ballistic program.
Okay.
Various phone apps are out there, that sort of thing. And the advantage to that is they're going to calculate wind drift based on that long distance, which the bullet is actually going.
Sure. So wind will affect it over the
Wind,
hypotenuse.
that's exactly right. You have to remember that. And then the other thing too is in some of those instances, the method of calculating this correction by angle cosine is a fairly simplistic method. It's if you were to go back in time, that used to be called the rifleman's rule. Some of the modern ballistic programs that are out there that you can download on your phone for, $9 or $10, the advantage those have is they use a more sophisticated algorithm in calculating bullet drop on some of those long shots. So some of the listeners here might notice in the manual, for example, in those rangefinders, we specify if you're looking, say, an 800-yard plus shot and a steeper angle, you're going to get the best results by using line of sight and then plugging that into a ballistics calculator.
Interesting.
So little bit of a twist to that.
Okay.
Yeah, that wind component, it always is tricky when you get whether it's a longer bow shot or a rifle shot, because the horizontal distance may not be that great, but the line of sight and that time of bullet flight, or the time that bullet is in the air, or the arrow, it is being affected.
Because it's not like it's in this sort of vacuum for any period of time in there. It is actually in the air for a longer time than your horizontal or your angle compensation distance might tell you. And then you've got things like spin drift. You just have it being in the atmosphere for that long, and depending on how great of a distance you're talking about, it could mean the difference between when you're going to go subsonic or transonic or something. Yeah.
But, all that being said, too, the reason that we suggest in those manuals, for the vast majority of shooting, especially for a hunter, the vast majority of situations you're going to get into, that HCD does a really good job, too. And that's why, we generally will steer guys to use that, except when you get into these sort of extreme situations of high angle and long range. But HCD, that method does a pretty darn good job all around.
Yeah, meaning horizontal component display. I think that's our vernacular for it in our lineup.
Yeah, that's our twist on it.
And so then, this can be really effective, like you said. So we did mention bow hunters, or really any projectile. So you talk about a bow, a crossbow, rifle, anything like that. Obviously a big thing too for your tree stand hunters. So it doesn't have to necessarily be in the mountains. Tree stand hunters, you find yourself up pretty high. You may be shooting down at some steep angles, even in your more densely wooded areas with not many mountains too.
Right.
Can't leave out muzzleloaders, Jim. And Paul, I know you got a couple long-range muzzleloaders.
Absolutely. Yeah, very important. Yeah, it definitely comes into play.
Yeah. How about, so we're discussing, you brought up the long-range aspect of it, and when you're doing kind of a steep angle with some long-range stuff. How about just if I'm at more of a flat range, flat-ish, range, like we have some around here where in Wisconsin it's fairly hilly but not mountainous by any means. Am I just using straight line distance there on my rangefinder to range a target, even if it might appear to be 1 degree up or 1 degree down? That's pretty?
Yeah. What you do in that instance, you just leave that rangefinder in that HCD mode. When you're shooting relatively flat and you have very little tilt on the barrel like that, the math in there is going to figure it out, but the correction it's going to do is going to be very, very, very slight.
Okay.
And really maybe nothing. But the advantage is the user doesn't really have to think about that. You can leave it in that mode. It's absolutely fine to shoot flat horizontal country with it. It's kind of a nice thing. It's something you really don't have to worry about. You can just let the math inside the device take care of it. So
sweet.
Yeah.
If you're shooting at an angle, like let's say we're talking maybe 20, 30 degrees, something like that, but it is a longer shot, is there kind of a threshold where you want to make that transition to, I want to use line of sight versus the HCD and kind of make those more specific calculations? Or is there like a, at some of those softer angles, if you will, or less severe angles, you can get away with HCD more?
There's not a black and white cutoff in there. We've suggested in the past, if someone is shooting over 800 yards and they're under about a 15 degree angle, which is not a great deal of angle.
Okay, right.
HCD is going to do okay for them.
Gotcha.
Once you go over 800 yards, you're going to, even with a slight angle, you really want to probably transition over to a ballistic program and line of sight ranging. And then when you have a steeper angle, when you go over 15 degrees, say between 15 and 30, what we suggest is backing off that maximum distance. So, 400 yards with those angles, HCD is going to do a pretty good job for you. Once you go beyond 400 yards and say you've got a 20 or 30 degree angle, you're going to get better results by, again, flipping to line of sight and running it in your ballistic app.
Yeah.
And the disadvantage, you guys are shooters, you understand that too. The problem with the ballistic app is it kind of slows that whole process down, because now you do have to input a range in there and consult it for dope. Where the nice thing in HCD mode, it's kind of doing everything for you. It's just telling you a range to dial to, and boom, you're done.
Yeah.
But again, anytime you're in longer distances and steeper angles, you probably want to be taking a little bit extra time thinking about that shot anyway. So makes sense.
Yeah,
kind
absolutely.
of fits.
I can't really think of a time where in a hunting scenario personally, like I know it happens, and there's some guys out there that are just super pro at, got their gear dialed, but I just haven't been in a scenario where I've really had to step it out of HCD.
Right. Do you feel like, too, like for archers, are they pretty much always in HCD?
Yeah, they can be. And again, the thing to remember is it's always fine on horizontal. It's never going to hurt you leaving it in HCD in horizontal mode. And anytime, for an archer, if it's a tree stand, you've got to be way up in a tree for that to really start to make a difference.
Okay.
But again, it's not going to hurt to do it. And I think where it actually really, for the archers, where it becomes very important is the guys hunting Western country, where you might well be, number one, archers typically Western hunting, you're likely going to be shooting further, and many of them do out there. And it's more an instance there of hunting on foot, mountainous country, and you might be making an 80-yard downhill shot on a fairly steep slope, and that's where having HCD in the rangefinder is going to make a huge difference for those guys.
Okay.
I may have brought this scenario up that I was in hunting whitetails here in Wisconsin the last time we talked about rangefinders, but it just stands out to me. I was in a tree stand, I was on a ridge, and down to my left side was like, I felt like I was like, 10 feet in the tree.
Yeah.
Down to the right side, I felt like I was 100 feet in the tree, and I go, gosh, I wonder how far is it? That looks forever away if I ranged to do. It was like 40 yards. I'm like, oh my gosh, that looks forever away.
Yeah.
I can actually make that shot. Like it was
That's
really
a good
surprising.
example, right? And that was the horizontal component of that distance showing up. Yeah,
but
very interesting.
But the deer would have looked probably itty bitty to the naked eye, So it's like it was like this bizarre phenomenon. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's like 40 yards.
That is really bizarre, huh? Well, Paul, you did a really good job on this. We kept our 10-minute talk to less than 15 minutes, so
that's a win.
Not bad. Well, for everybody out there listening, as usual, comment on YouTube or hit us up on Instagram, however you want to do that, or just give us a call, any of that stuff. If you have questions about angle compensation, rangefinders, all that sort of thing, so we're always happy to help out with that. But hopefully this maybe answered some questions or just gave you a few more things to stew on when you're playing around with your rangefinder.
Hopefully we didn't raise more questions than answers.
Yeah, Paul, what's your phone? What's your desk line here?
Do you still have the extension 308, or did we?
No, we changed all those extensions around.
It was like the most perfect extension ever.
But Jimmy, we've got a great crew of guys answering phones here, and most of these guys are pretty darn familiar with angle shooting. So, yeah. But I'm always happy. I'm absolutely happy to help someone out. Anybody can get you hooked up to me. So.
I was always jealous of Paul's and Muck and Hearn's extensions, because Muck and Hearn was 280, Paul was 308.
I know.
And I just had like a regular arbitrary numbers.
I was sorry to lose that one.
Yeah. Shoot. Well, again, thanks everybody for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.